All right, good morning, everybody. Let's get it started. I'm Jill Wu, Enterprise Communications Manager at Emory. We're glad to have Dr. Aneesh Mehta with us this morning. Dr. Mehta is an Associate Professor of Infectious Diseases at Emory University School of Medicine, and he's the Chief of Infectious Diseases Services at Emory University Hospital. He is going to share the latest development of Emory's new antibody testing, as well as how antibody testing could help us fight against COVID-19. After his talk, we'll open up to questions. And just a reminder, please mute yourself if you're not speaking. So with that, I will pass down to you, Dr. Mehta.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Jill, for that very nice introduction. Today, I'm very excited to talk to everyone about a new antibody test or serologic test that Emory University and Emory Healthcare are going to be offering to our patients, to our healthcare workers, and to our employees, and then hopefully down the road to a broader audience. As you know, when a virus infects the body, it finds its target cell and then enters that cell, hijacks that cell's own machinery to make clones of itself. And as it's making, these cells are making the virus, the new viruses, they are released into our body, and through our blood and through other ways gets to different regions of our body. Our immune system then tries to find these new viruses and builds antibodies to bind them and remove them from the system. It is critically important in any response to a virus infection that we are able to make these antibodies. The test that Emory Healthcare will be offering will detect those antibodies against the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the virus that's causing COVID-19. And we'll be able to know whether people have been exposed to the virus and also when they are building these antibodies. What is also really important for us to look at is how these antibodies are working within our patients and within our staff members. These tests have been developed in collaboration between the Emory Vaccine Center, and particularly Dr. Jens Warmert, and Emory Medical Laboratories, led by Dr. John Roback. The combination of the tests that we'll be able to offer moving down in the next few weeks will not only detect which antibodies patients have, but in the future be able to detect those antibodies that are working well and protecting our patients and protecting our healthcare workers. This test, I think, is going to be vitally important, not only to identifying people who've become infected, but also as we offer it to a broader audience, be able to really detect the impact COVID-19 has had in communities, how widespread the infection is. As has been talked about for the last several weeks, we had a slow ramp up of our diagnostic test for COVID-19. Therefore, we were not able to detect all the community spread that had been occurring. So we'll be able to offer tests like these serologic tests to our epidemiologists and scientists that will be able to explore in our communities throughout Georgia and throughout the country who has been impacted, which communities have really seen this infection, even if they weren't sick enough to come into the hospital. So being able to offer this test very rapidly, so the test was developed over just a couple weeks, and being able to offer that to our patients and our healthcare workers, and then to the broader scientific community is a real landmark achievement and shows the wonderful collaboration we have between the clinical side of Emory and the research side of Emory. I'm really excited to be part of this process and have watched these wonderful laboratorians and researchers come together to offer this test so that we can offer that to our patients and our colleagues. With that, I'll be happy to take any questions about our serologic test or antibody test and any other questions that you have about COVID-19.
Hi, Doctor. This is Grant Blankenship with Georgia Public Broadcasting. I have two questions. One, some of the antibody tests that I've already read about only really know when you have antibodies for coronavirus in general, not necessarily specifically the novel coronavirus. How is this test that you've developed different from those tests? And then the second part of the question is, given that there are all these different antibody tests being developed across the country, how are we as a nation going to have one unified body of this sort of information if the tests are somehow subtly different and sort of not along exactly the same lines?
So that's a great question. And Catherine just is asking me to remind everyone to use the chat feature to ask your questions, but great, I will be happy to answer both these questions. So the first question is, there are a lot of antibody tests that are very sort of cover any coronavirus. And as we know, there are multiple coronaviruses out there, and 4 of them just cause the common cold. This test that Emory has developed is very specific to a protein that is on the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the virus that causes COVID-19. And it does not cross-react with other coronaviruses. So we believe this is a very sensitive test, meaning it will find the vast majority of people that have become infected with COVID-19. And it is very specific, meaning that it is specific to the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and it will not cross-react or detect other coronaviruses. So this, I think, is really the next generation of testing for antibodies, is to hone in on those specific people that have been infected with this virus. And the second question was as to the broad variety of testing that is out there. This is true for any clinical testing. There are multiple people who develop their own test, and I think that is important, that we look at all the tests that are out there and then find the ones that are working the best for our patients and for our scientists. So as the weeks go on, there will be a lot of comparison between different tests that were developed in different places. The critical importance of doing a clinical test robustly is having good validation and good testing. Our scientists, as well as our Emory Medical Labs, have spent the last several days around the clock doing that validation and testing to make sure this test works well and performs the way that we want it to. Other labs are doing the same thing, and in the end, we will be able to know how they compare to each other. But it's very important that we have multiple groups working on developing these tests so that we do come to the best test in the long run. So it looks like the next question is, how is this test being done and how long will it take to get the results? That is a very good question. This test is simply done by drawing 1 tube of blood, just like we draw any other clinical test, and that is sent to the laboratory. They will put it on the special machine that does this antibody test, the serologic test, and we usually will get a result back within 24 hours. As we move forward, our Emory Medical Labs is really looking to scale up this test and hopes to reach a goal of being able to do 5,000 tests per day, hopefully by mid-June, as we continue to be able to offer this test to a broader audience once we are able to scale this up.
Great. Catherine just sent over a link to our newest release on antibody testing this morning. So feel free to take a look and continue submitting your questions via this chat box. I see Karen from WebMD has a hand up. Karen, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I was wondering about the scale-up process. We've seen shortages of a lot of parts for the regular testing at this point. Do you think that that's going to be an issue with this scale-up?
That's a great question. So we have seen a lot of shortages of diagnostic testing supplies and reagents, the chemicals that we use to do these testing. And that has been particularly problematic for the diagnostic test, what's called the PCR test, the nose swab that we do to detect SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. This is a little bit of a different test that uses different reagents and different methods. So at this point in time, we are pretty confident that we have the supplies that we need. However, as more and more people do, more and more labs are doing this test, there could be some shortages around the country. We want to anticipate those, and we are working to make sure that we have the adequate supply to offer to all of our patients and healthcare workers. And we're pretty confident that we'll be able to scale up to that 5,000 tests and continue that volume through the summer.
Great. Can I ask, if I can ask one more about Do we know whether asymptomatic people have enough antibodies to be protected against COVID? Is that one of the things that you're trying to determine?
Yeah, this is a really important question, is what are these antibodies doing for our patients? Are they protecting them? And are there differences between patients with very little symptoms versus patients that would have moderate amounts of symptoms versus those who have severe disease? That is all work that is actively being done currently here at Emory and in multiple other places. But here at Emory, we're very interested in knowing, do these antibodies protect us, and when do those protective antibodies come about? And so in the next few weeks, we'll have more data on that as we're doing these serologic tests here at Emory Medical Laboratories. At this point in time, we're not sure how protective and how long this protection of these antibodies will last. But I do think in the coming weeks we'll know that information. We'll actually be able to offer that to our patients and our healthcare workers, how well protected they are, and then we can follow them over time and to see if that protection remains.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick reminder, please submit your questions via the chat box if you can. It will be easier for Dr. Mehta to take a look at it and answer each one. Thank you.
So the next question from Christy at 11 Alive is, what is the next step after the test? If you find antibodies that help protect against the virus, what does that person do next to help others who are still sick? Do you take more of their blood? Wonderful question. So when we detect the antibodies in the patient or healthcare worker's blood, we can tell them if they've been exposed or not. And that is a really important question for people to know. And then, as I mentioned, in the coming weeks, we'll know if it's protective or not. And once we find out if it's protective, then we can invite those patients or healthcare workers back if they want to. And we can collect more of their blood to find out exactly how their immune system is responding. And also, one of our main interests here at Emory is to collect those antibodies, whether that be to collect their plasma and build a convalescent plasma bank so that we could use that as a therapy, or directly collect their antibodies and use that as a potential therapy for patients in the future. We're exploring all those options because it's critically important for us to be able to offer all the patients at Emory and all the patients in Georgia the best therapies for COVID-19 infection. And this outbreak has only been going on for 3 months, so we're still very early into knowing what the best treatments are. But we do believe antibodies are a very good potential option for therapy, and we hope to have good data and potentially a good therapy in the next several weeks.
Any other questions?
So we have 2 additional questions. One, can we assume that if people test positive for antibodies, that they have had COVID-19, or could the antibodies come from somewhere else? So that's an excellent question. The major testing that we did is trying to be sure that these antibodies detect the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And we are very confident that this is very specific to that virus. So therefore, if someone has antibodies that are positive on this test, we detect the antibodies on this test, we are very confident that they did become infected and had COVID-19. Whether they had mild symptoms or moderate or severe, or maybe very little symptoms at all, we hope that this antibody test will detect antibodies in all those patients. The second question is, you talked about a slow ramp up of diagnostic testing. Is that now an Emory diagnostic test as well? So again, a great question. Emory has really been a leader in ramping up diagnostic testing for all of our patients, whether they be in the community or be in our hospitals. When this first started, Emory very quickly developed their own laboratory-based test, a test that we built up ourselves here, and we were able to then offer about 200 tests a day. But that was not even enough for the volume of patients that we were seeing throughout our healthcare system. So we were able to bring in 2 additional tests to help us in diagnosing our patients with COVID-19. We have our test that was built by Roche Laboratories, and we're able to offer a couple hundred tests on that platform. And in addition, we have the rapid test developed by Cepheid that we're able to, for patients that need to, that are in the emergency room or need to go to the operating room, very quickly determine if they have COVID-19 infections or not. So we're using all three tests every single day in our healthcare system to help diagnose patients, whether they have COVID-19 or not, and get them to the appropriate level of care that they need, regardless if they have COVID-19 or not. Okay, the next question is from Karen Weintraub from WebMD. Should everyone eventually get tested even if they have not had obvious symptoms? So that's a very good question. And it's something that our epidemiologists here at Emory, in collaboration with the state epidemiologist and the CDC, are working on. There will be a lot of what they call serosurveillance. It's basically going out there and surveying, doing surveys of different communities and different populations, doing things like questionnaires to ask them what symptoms they had, but it will also include drawing their blood to look at if they have antibodies to COVID-19. And they'll use all that data together to really see what the impact of this outbreak has been in our communities in Georgia. Again, we believe that we've only been detecting some, but probably not all of the patients that are out there because we weren't able to test everybody, particularly at the beginning of the outbreak. And also a lot of patients, a lot of people have mild symptoms. And so don't actually need to come to the healthcare setting for these diagnostic tests. These sort of epidemiologic surveys will be able to detect in our communities what, who has had COVID-19 and how widespread the infection is. That data will be coming over the next several weeks to several months by wonderful scientists and epidemiologists. Another question from Karen Weintraub at WebMD. How will blood be collected and how much is needed, and would it be possible to do at home? So let me answer the first part and then I'll answer the second part. So the blood that's needed to be collected for this is a very small volume. It's a very typical tube of blood or vial of blood that we would use for most testing that we do in our clinics and in our hospitals. So it's a very small amount of blood, and it can be processed very quickly. And we hope that this test will be continued to be used in a very routine fashion. Is it possible to do at home? This is a very good question. There are scientists here at Emory, one of my colleagues, Matt Collins, and many other colleagues around Emory and around the world are working on at-home diagnostic tests, whether this be from a finger stick, just like you would do to check your blood glucose, your blood sugar levels if you're diabetic, or a swab or collection of your saliva. All these avenues are being looked at to help us to figure out if we can do some of this testing in rural settings, in rural community healthcare centers, and also potentially doing these this testing at home. I think you'll see a lot of really fascinating development of these tests as the weeks go on.
Great. I see a few people joining us via phone. Anybody else on the phone has questions? No? Any additional questions at all? All right. So if there's no further questions, thank you again, Dr. Mehta, for your time and expertise. And thank you everyone else for joining us today, as always. Oh, we have one more question from Christy.
So Christy from 11 Live is best guess when this will be offered out to the public. So as we ramp up, we'll be able to offer this to more and more people. So currently this test is going to be offered to patients here in Emory University or Emory Healthcare hospitals and in our employee health clinics. But then we'll be able to roll this out more broadly to other clinics in the Emory Healthcare system, and eventually hopefully have other clinics and other hospitals be able to send the samples to us. So as we ramp this up, we definitely want to offer this to a broader audience to make sure that we answer the questions that the patients have, as well as their healthcare providers have, as to who has COVID-19 infections or not.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Mehta. Like I mentioned, Catherine will send out a recording of this press conference right afterwards. And if you guys have any other follow-up questions, feel free to email me and Catherine. Thank you again for everybody's time. Hope you all have a wonderful day and take care.
Thank you, everyone.